This video is sponsored by Trove. If you haven't heard of Trove yet, now you have. It's a gorgeous voxel MMORPG where you can play as one of over 17 available classes that's free to play on Xbox, PlayStation, PC, and yes, even the Nintendo Switch. Now that you're educated on this amazing game, allow me to introduce you to its brand new expansion patch, Sunrise. This is the biggest thing to happen to an already humongousOid game, bringing to it the brand new Solarion class, new region, new weapons, and of course new customization options and mounts and pets, because we all love pets. And to celebrate the release of all the new amazing content in Sunrise, the devs are hosting a TikTok contest, and don't lie to me, I know you have TikTok, where you can receive 1,000 euros for cosplaying one of the characters and getting the video with the most likes. What's that in American money, you ask? About $994. And even if you don't win, you'll still get some amazing special loot and rewards in-game. So what are you waiting for? Try out Trove for free on whatever console you want to while we're all waiting for Breath of the Wild 2, play the new Sunrise update with your friends, and get cracking on some cosplay for money and loot. Link is in the description below. And now, on to the video. A Zelda game without bosses is like a bowl of ramen with only noodles. It's like, yeah, it's a bowl, those are ramen noodles, but where's the flavor? Where's the succulent meat? Where's those little swirly looking things that are sometimes making appearances in the bowl? Bosses are a big part of what makes Zelda games so memorable, just like other ingredients are to ramen noodles. And for loreheads like myself, they're also a very good way to deepen one's understanding of the in-universe lore of the games. So in this video, I'm gonna go over all of the unique or major bosses and mini-bosses in Ocarina of Time and briefly explain their existence because let's face it, it's been 24 years since it was released and there are probably lots of people out there who haven't played it. Oh, and expect spoilers, obviously. Let's begin with the very first set of bosses in the game. Queen Ghoma, King Dodongo, and Baronade. All three of these bosses were the direct result of Ganondorf throwing a fit because nobody would give him the spiritual stones. First, he wanted the Kokiri Emerald from the Deku Tree, and when the Great Deku Tree refused, Ganondorf cursed it with a literal giant spider monster known as the armored parasite Ghoma in order to sap the tree of its power and literally kill it, which he succeeds at actually. Now, Ganondorf himself is a powerful sorcerer, capable of performing great acts of dark magic, so this means that Ghoma originated from one of two places. Either one, Ghoma was created out of thin air by Ganondorf to curse and sap the Deku Tree, or two, Ganondorf used his dark powers to evolve a normal spider into the humongous monster Ghoma, although this doesn't really matter much in the grand scheme of things and can be left up to personal interpretation because the end result is the same. Next up, we have the boss of Dodongo's cavern, King Dodongo. Similarly to Ghoma, King Dodongo was heavily implied to be the result of a curse from Ganondorf. According to the leader of the Gorons, Darunia, Ganondorf also asked him for the Goron's ruby but was once again denied the spiritual stone, prompting the Desert King to fill the cavern with quote ancient creatures and seal it shut with a giant boulder in the entrance, preventing the Gorons from accessing the finger-licking good rocks inside. Now, given that Dodongo's cavern had no Dodongos in it before Ganondorf's curse, and given that these ancient creatures that Darunia is talking about are in fact the Dodongos and King Dodongo himself, this means that Dodongo's cavern once had Dodongos in it, hence its name, possibly even one as big as the skull present in the dungeon. But they were all cleared out long ago by ancient Gorons, or rather by an ancient heroic Goron in particular, but more on that later. This means that Ganondorf must have resurrected the Dodongos from their ancient tombs and by extension King Dodongo himself with dark magic in order to punish the Gorons for not giving him the stone. King Dodongo had a short second lifespan though. Next we have the Anemone Baronade, which was responsible for putting Jabu Jabu in such a bad mood. Once again, this seems to be the direct result of Ganondorf's curse since King Zora confirms that Jabu Jabu was different and sickly following Ganondorf's visit. The Gerudo likely asked about the spiritual stone and was given an unsatisfying answer, since the stone was actually in possession of the Zora princess Ruto. And similarly to Ghoma, Baronade leached the life of Jabu Jabu parasitically and might have even killed Jabu Jabu if it wasn't for the big fish literally swallowing the hero of time. Points to Link for being a more effective painkiller than ibuprofen. Now it's time to grow up. After Link turns into an adult, 7 years have passed and once again Ganondorf has been running around setting bosses in places they shouldn't be. This is again true of the first, second, and third temples which feature Phantom Ganon, Volvagia the Dragon, and the water tentacle monster Morpha. Phantom Ganon was an apparition created by Ganondorf for the purposes of stopping stopping Link from saving Saria from the curse of the Forest Temple, which awakened her as a sage. However, it should be noted that Ganondorf knowingly made his doppelganger ghost a bit less powerful than he himself is, possibly because he knew from the get-go that he would need to let Link live in order to come into the castle himself and reveal the Triforce of Courage, but that's speculative. Volvagia was another case of the dead being brought back to life by the hand of Ganondorf, and like I mentioned earlier, Volvagia himself was actually slain long ago by a Goron hero using the fabled Megaton Hammer according to Link. Not this Link, the Goron named after Link known as Link. Anyway, Volvagia was a dragon that lived inside Death Mountain as its protector spirit and is even said to be the ancestor of Velu, the protector spirit of Dragon Roost Mountain. Allegedly, he was always rather aggressive, and as such, the ancient Goron hero saw fit to smash him to smithereens with a giant hammer. And once Ganondorf became ruler of the land, he decided he would make a spectacle of the Gorons and feed them one by one as snacks to the freshly revived Volvagia in order to scare the other Hyrulean races into obedience. Of course, Link has something to say about this. The final boss that Ganondorf is solely responsible for creating would be the very strange aquatic amoeba Morpha, which Ganondorf placed inside the water temple in order to both free Zor's domain and its inhabitants and drain Lake Hylia of its water. We're never given an explicit reason as to why Ganondorf so royally screwed over the Zora people, but it can be assumed that it was in order to halt the progress of the Water Sage's awakening. Now, with Ganondorf's many creations out of the way, let's move on to the bosses that have their own reason for being, you know, bosses. Back in the Forest Temple, there's a group of Poe sisters that haunts the area known as the Poe Sisters. These ghostly girls don't have an explained backstory present anywhere in the game, but it can be assumed that their spirits have been bound to the Forest Temple for quite some time, since there are portraits of the ghosts located within its castle-like walls. It's also interesting to note that each of the girls, Jo, Beth, Amy, and Meg, are named after the four sisters from the novel Little Women. This implies that they weren't created as Poes, but were once actually living people. And since Poes are heavily implied to be evil spirits regardless of their once peaceful natures who are tethered to the living world because of some unresolved attachment, we can also assume that the girls were probably all murdered in this temple before their natural deaths, and may have actually been friendly when they were alive. Next up, let's take a look at the infamous mini-boss of the Water Temple, Dark Link. Dark Link is without a doubt probably the most popular Zelda enemy other than Ganondorf himself, and for good reason. Evil doppelganger types are always popular enemies across all kinds of media, since it's a great question that Navi also raises in the game. How exactly are you supposed to conquer yourself? Is that even possible from a philosophical standpoint? Regardless, I'd like to point out that one thing that people confuse a lot is the identity of Dark Link shown here with that of Link's shadow from A Link to the Past, or the Shadow Links from other games. Simply put, those other inverted Link enemies that look similar are actually completely different in both their origins and their purposes. Now keep in mind that there are many different Dark Link origin theories out there for Ocarina of Time, some of which are very good that you are more than welcome to believe if you so desire. But I'm going to explain what I think his origin story is from a very realistic and somewhat boring point of view, which will differ from several of those theories. This Dark Link in Ocarina of Time, which is where the name Dark Link comes from, was most likely placed here indirectly by whoever made the temple in the first place. See, the Water Temple was created as a place where the Zora could worship the water spirits, but it's also clear that it was designed to be a trial as well. What? Trials in Zelda games? Unheard of. But it's true, because unlike the other temples where it's more or less about Link finding his way to the end of whatever structure he's in, the Water Temple specifically shows you the end right off the bat, and instead requires intelligent manipulation of water levels and going back and forth between its many rooms and hidden compartments in order to solve its grand puzzle and access the final area just outside of your reach. And perhaps the solution of the temple is in and of itself how the Zora worship the water spirits. That being said, this also means that the room in which we face Dark Link was created as part of this big trial, along with the room's mechanics. This room is illusory. It creates false images that make you think it has no walls and that the floor is covered by a very reflective surface of water. Emphasis on reflective, which is the point of this particular trial. It's my interpretation that the purpose of this room is to test the worshipper traversing through the Water Temple with a challenge of conquering the reflective darkness within themselves, in order to purify themselves themselves for the water spirits. After all, Navi doesn't imply that Dark Link is its own entity, like she does with every other monster in the game. If anything, she acts like Dark Link is just an extension of Link himself. And since Dark Link appears to originate from the tree in the middle of the room and reflects Link's appearance and moveset, it's my personal interpretation that the fruit of the tree, if you will, is a watery reflection of the individual who would brave the trials of the temple in order to seek purification from its waters. This is why Dark Link exists and is a boss, at least in Ocarina of Time. Number next, we have the mini-boss of the Shadow Temple and boss of the area beneath the well, and subject of many nightmares, the Dead Hand. Now previously, the Dead Hand and the Shadow Temple itself were hugely speculated over, but ever since the release of the Hyrule Encyclopedia, we've gotten a confirmed answer as to where the spooky temple came from. It was built as a place for the Sheikah to capture and torture the enemies of the royal family, which would explain the, torture devices and cages. It marks such a dark and bloody time for the history of Hyrule that the royal family is actually forbidden to even speak of it. Of course, there are many other mysteries present in the temple, but that's another video for another day. Dead Hand's presence in this old Sheikah temple can only be due to one of two things. Either one, the Dead Hand is the result of dark Sheikah experiments in order to create some sort of hungry, undead, man-eating monster with which to feed their subjects to get rid of them after they were done torturing them for information, explaining the Dead Hand chamber and many human bones present in it. Or two, the Dead Hand was supernaturally created from the aforementioned many corpses that line the Shadow Temple walls when the dark power of Bongo Bongo was released and added to the temple, cursing it and giving rise to the undead within. This would explain why the Dead Hand initially pops up underneath the well, and its dead appearance with the bleach white blood-stained skin and its human skull head. It would also explain the ability for Dead Hand to summon infinite numbers of hands to grab hold of its victims with. Though I personally favor the first explanation due to the fact that there are two Dead Hands in the game, implying pretty heavily that they were purposefully created and placed in Sheikah torture chambers. And speaking of the Shadow Temple, its final boss, Bongo Bongo, is also shrouded in mystery. For those who don't know, Bongo Bongo is an evil spirit whose appearance is similar to that of a hanging beheaded man, with a giant eye in its neck and cut off hands that just can't help but play the drums. Bongo Bongo was sealed within the well by the Sheikah leader Impa, but broke out when the darkness grew too powerful. And this is most likely because of the rise of Ganondorf's power, since he is in fact the leader of the forces of evil. Where Bongo Bongo came from initially though is again widely speculated over, but I have a more realistic take on its origin. Many people assume that the man whose house used to be located where the well sits now is the real identity of Bongo Bongo. And this may or may not be true. One thing's for certain though, and that is that Bongo Bongo is a spirit. A big spirit. Not to be overly simplistic, but we do see what spirits of the dead look like as far as size is concerned in the game. They're pose, and they almost always end up being smaller or thinner than the average human. But in some cases, we come across pose that are far bigger than the others, called big pose. And one of the biggest pose in particular is the boss named Jalhalla from the Wind Waker. Jalhalla is so massive because he's composed of other smaller pose. So here's the question. What if Bongo Bongo, the evil shadow spirit, is such a massive entity because he's composed of the spirits of many dead people? And you know where a bunch of dead people were made? In the middle of Kakariko, under the well, and within the Shadow Temple, conveniently where Bongo Bongo originated from. My personal interpretation is that the Dead Hands killed so many people that their combined lingering hateful spirits manifested as the Phantom Shadow Beast Bongo Bongo, whose hands were cut off due to the spirits of the dead being shackled in life, and whose head was cut off to signify their executions. Moving on to the next temple, the Spirit Temple, dedicated to the Sand Goddess, located within the Gerudo Desert. Also the hideout for Ganondorf and his followers before he rose to power and moved to the floating Hyrule Castle. The mini-bosses of the temple are the Iron Knuckles, which have a pretty simple explanation. They're brainwashed Gerudo women in suits of heavy armor swinging massive weapons. And honestly, I don't have a problem believing that they could physically do that because have you seen their biceps? But the bigger question is who is responsible for brainwashing these poor women? Well, that would be the boss/bosses of the temple, the twin witch sisters known separately as Kotake and Koume, or together as Twin Rova. According to the lore, Twin Rova is Ganondorf's surrogate mother/mothers. And since there's actually two of them and they're sisters, I personally feel like the term surrogate mother used here actually means more like adoptive mothers rather than the the other meaning of a surrogate mother, which includes a woman birthing a child for another woman who can't. That being said, it makes sense then that Twinrova would be such a devout follower of Ganondorf. They're just proud to see their little boy grow up to be the evil king he was always meant to be. What a cutie. They're also both over 400 years old and apparently go to heaven when they die. Huh, they must have helped other old ladies across the street when they were alive. The final boss of this game is none other than Ganondorf himself, who transforms into Ganon after his initial defeat. Most people know Ganondorf's backstory even if they haven't played Ocarina of Time, but I'll go over it anyway. Ganondorf was the last known male Gerudo born to the Gerudo race that's historically been entirely female. Well, mostly female. It was said that once every 100 years a boy would be born, and that boy would be the Gerudo king, which is why Ganondorf is the last Gerudo king. However, since he kind of tried to end the world, ever since Ganondorf's defeat at the end of Ocarina of Time, and Wind Waker, and Twilight Princess, and A Link to the Past, the Gerudo women have completely sworn off men, even those of their own race, and as such, they are now, for all intents and purposes, entirely composed of women. If there have been male Gerudo born since the time of Ganondorf, it has been undocumented and unconfirmed, and they have been banished from their own homeland, which is why their existence these days is a theory. A believable theory, but a theory nonetheless. But back to Ganondorf. In Wind Waker, we're able to get a better understanding of why Ganondorf did what he did in regards to overthrowing the Hylian royal family. He was jealous. The Gerudo Desert is a harsh environment, and ultimately as the Gerudo king, he wanted the lands or winds of Hyrule to be the new home for his people, which seems noble, but he absolutely went about it the wrong way, and somewhere along the way lost sight of his democratic ambitions and instead began to covet the ultimate power known as the Triforce, in order to subjugate the entire world to his will, forcefully. Initially, Ganondorf swears allegiance to the King of Hyrule in order to craftily locate the Triforce for himself, but Zelda sees through his lies and asks Link to help her with getting rid of the man with the evil eyes, since, you know, you can't count on the King of Hyrule to do something like that. After Link and Zelda open the Door of Time to find the Master Sword and thus the entrance to the Sacred Realm, Ganondorf actually predicted that they would do this, and gains free access to the Triforce within the Sacred Realm and attempts to take it for himself. However, due to the imbalance within his own heart, the Triforce splits into its three separate pieces of power, wisdom, and courage, each then residing within Ganondorf, Zelda, and Link respectively, as they represented those individual attributes the most. After this happened, Ganondorf wanted to find the other two pieces to reform the completed Triforce and thus regain ultimate power. But with Zelda being in hiding and Link fast asleep for 7 years, he had to come up with another plan in order to locate the missing pieces. And just like Ganondorf had Link do his work for him 7 years ago, once again, Link located Zelda and her Triforce of Wisdom and brought the Triforce of Courage himself directly to Ganondorf without the Gerudo usurper ever having to leave his throne room, which he predicted. Again. Of course, Link is able to defeat Ganondorf, which he did not predict, who tries to bring the castle down on top of Link and Zelda in another attempt to kill them. When this fails, Ganondorf, who I guess was still not dead, calls upon the Triforce of Power to transform into the pig-like monster known as Ganon, who lives for about 40 seconds since the Hero of Time with the Blade of Evil's Bane was standing like 2 feet away and proceeds to kill Ganon immediately, who then reverts back to Ganondorf, who then becomes sealed away temporarily, but for the remainder of this game. Simply put, Ganon is the demonic form that Ganondorf transforms into that embodies his lust for power, and as far as the timeline's concerned, this is the very moment that Ganon was created, who, just as a reminder, we still haven't been able to rid the world of to this day. I personally believe that Ganon is the embodiment of the curse that demise places upon Hylia back in the events of Skyward Sword, and that Ganondorf was able to access this power through the Triforce of Power, but that's just my personal headcanon. Ultimately, this is all kind of the goddess's fault, since they're the ones who decided to leave an all-powerful relic in the hands of mere mortals anyway, but alas, we are not destined to understand the whims of the gods. That being said though, this concludes the explanation of all the bosses from Ocarina of Time. And I'm curious, did you learn something new, or did you know all this stuff before watching? Let me know in the comments below, and please consider leaving a like if you enjoyed the video. If the turnout's decent, I'll continue this idea with the other Zelda games like Twilight Princess and the Wind Waker. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to stick around for those and many more video game videos to come. Huge thanks as always to my bandit crew, who are the reason I can continue to make these videos. And if you'd like to help out too, check out the links in the description to find out how. Or head over to my Ko-Fi page to figure out how to get me to review your theories in a video. That's all I've got for this one, so as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. This is Bandit, looking forward to seeing you next time, and signing out. Peace!